Welcome back to Protecting Trade Secrets. I'm Professor Seth C. Oranburg. In the previous lecture, we explored Frank Knight's distinction between risk and uncertainty, and why that distinction matters for trade secret protection. We saw how four domains of uncertainty, legal, technological, entrepreneurial, and human behavioral, create challenges that can't be solved with data alone. And we confronted the trade secret paradox. You must prove reasonable efforts before knowing what will be deemed reasonable. Now, in this second lecture of Module 3, we shift from understanding uncertainty to managing measurable risk. While we can't quantify how a judge will interpret our efforts, or how technology will evolve, or whether employees will act ethically, we can quantify certain threats. We can estimate the probability that a departing employee will download files. We can measure the frequency of phishing attacks. We can analyze access patterns and identify anomalies. This lecture focuses on the tools for assessing quantifiable risks, vulnerability audits that expose gaps between policy and practice, risk matrices that prioritize threats by likelihood and impact, and the 5W1H framework, in which we ask who, what, when, where, why, and how to structure trade secret threat analysis. By the end, you'll have practical methods for mapping where your secrets are vulnerable and documenting that you took those vulnerabilities seriously. Let's start with the most fundamental tool, the vulnerability audit. A vulnerability audit begins with a simple premise. You must know how your trade secrets could be lost before you can decide how to protect them. This isn't about paranoia, it's about visibility. Most organizations assume their protections are stronger than they actually are. They believe that password-protected servers mean secrets are secure, that non-disclosure agreements prevent disclosure, that employees understand what's confidential. But assumptions aren't evidence, and when trade secret litigation begins, courts demand evidence. The audit process starts with access mapping. Who can see each trade secret? Is access limited by role so that only people who need the information for their job can view it? Our logs kept showing who accessed what and when. Our permissions updated when team members change projects, get promoted, or leave the company. Many companies discovered during audits that theoretical restrictions don't match operational reality. A server might be password protected, but the password is shared among dozens of users. A confidential file might be labeled proprietary, but it's stored in a shared folder accessible to contractors who never signed non-disclosure agreements. An engineer who left 6 months ago still has remote access to the repository. These aren't hypothetical problems. In United States versus Jin, a 2013 Seventh Circuit case, Motorola caught a departing engineer because their system logs detected abnormal download activity. Hanjuan Jin, an engineer working on sensitive projects, downloaded over 1,000 confidential documents in the weeks before an unannounced trip to China. She was stopped at the airport with the files in her luggage. The case became a landmark for two reasons. First, it showed that monitoring works. Motorola's logs provided the evidence needed for prosecution under the Economic Espionage Act. Second, it demonstrated that companies who can't show they monitored access may struggle to prove misappropriation because they can't document when or how information was taken. Access mapping isn't just a technical exercise, it's a legal one. If you can't show who had access to a trade secret, you can't prove it was actually secret. If everyone in the company could see it, courts may conclude it was generally known internally and therefore not protectable. The audit then examines disclosure pathways. When is information shared outside the company? Are non-disclosure agreements signed before disclosure, not after? Are the non-disclosure agreements specific to the information being shared, or are they generic templates that don't clearly identify what's confidential? Is the information labeled, segregated, and protected by technical measures? If a trade secret appears in a pitch deck sent to potential investors, is that deck marked confidential? Is it sent through secure channels, or emailed as an unencrypted attachment? Are recipients told explicitly that the information is proprietary and must not be shared? Courts repeatedly emphasize that labeling matters. In Airfacts Incorporated versus Amezaga, a 2018 Fourth Circuit case we discussed in an earlier lecture, the plaintiff lost because it couldn't show that departing employees knew the information was confidential. There were no signed non-disclosure agreements, no documented access restrictions, no labeling. The court held that trade secret protection requires visible effort, not just internal understanding. Finally, vulnerability audits include cultural and procedural review. Are employees trained on what constitutes a trade secret and how to handle confidential information? Is training documented so you can prove it happened? Are confidentiality policies enforced consistently, or do managers routinely bypass them under deadline pressure? Is there a clear process for reporting concerns? If an employee suspects that a colleague is mishandling trade secrets, do they know who to tell? And when violations occur, does the company respond? Or does it look the other way because the violator is a high performer or a senior executive? Culture shapes behavior, and behavior shapes whether courts view your trade secret claims as credible. A company that treats secrecy as a formality, something to check off during onboarding but ignore in daily work, will struggle to prove reasonable efforts. A company that treats secrecy as operational reality, embedded in workflows, reinforced in training, and enforced through consequences, builds a defensible record. The value of a vulnerability audit isn't just in identifying gaps, it's in the discipline it creates. It forces organizations to articulate how they protect their most valuable information and where that protection falls short. It creates documentation that, if litigation arises, shows the company took secrecy seriously, even if not every control was perfect. Not all trade secrets face the same level of risk, and not all risks demand the same level of response. This is where risk matrices become essential. They translate complex judgments into structured comparisons, helping organizations decide where to focus protection efforts. A risk matrix evaluates threats along two dimensions: likelihood of exposure and magnitude of harm if exposure occurs. Think of it as a grid. The vertical axis represents likelihood. How probable is it that this secret will be compromised? The horizontal axis represents impact. How damaging would that compromise be to the business? Likelihood can be informed by historical data. Industry studies show that approximately 60% of departing employees take confidential data with them, sometimes intentionally, sometimes inadvertently. If your company operates in a sector with high employee turnover and intense competition for talent, the likelihood of insider threats is high. If you operate in a stable industry with long-tenured staff, the likelihood might be lower. Impact depends on the nature of the secret and the competitive environment. If your main competitive advantage comes from a single manufacturing process, and that process would be easy for competitors to replicate once they know how it works, the impact of disclosure is catastrophic. If the secret is one of many techniques you use and competitors would need years to implement it, even with full knowledge, the impact is moderate. Now combine those dimensions. A trade secret with high likelihood and high impact, say a critical algorithm accessible to your entire engineering team, demands urgent, aggressive protection. Access should be restricted immediately. Monitoring should be enhanced. Non-disclosure agreements should be reinforced. Exit protocols should be tightened. A secret with low likelihood and low impact, perhaps an outdated pricing model that only one person uses, may warrant only routine safeguards. You document it in your inventory. You label it confidential. But you don't invest heavily in specialized controls. Secrets that fall in between require closer scrutiny. A trade secret with high impact but low likelihood, like a breakthrough innovation known only to 3 senior scientists, might justify extraordinary measures: restricted physical access, segmented digital storage, continuous monitoring, and possibly even criminal background checks for anyone who gets near it. A secret with high likelihood but low impact, like customer contact information that many sales reps access daily, calls for different measures: clear policies about acceptable use, regular training on confidentiality, logging of data exports, and swift enforcement when violations occur. The matrix doesn't supply exact answers. It supports deliberation. It helps teams articulate why they see a particular risk as serious or manageable. It surfaces disagreement. When 2 executives rate the same threat differently, the matrix forces them to explain their reasoning. Let me give you a real-world example. A biotech company I advised had a proprietary cell line used in drug development. The likelihood of exposure seemed low. Only 4 scientists had access. All were senior, all had signed strong non-disclosure agreements. But the impact would be catastrophic. If a competitor obtained that cell line, they could leapfrog years of research and development. Using a risk matrix, the company classified this as high impact, low likelihood, and decided to treat it as their highest priority secret, even though the probability of loss seemed remote. They implemented physical access controls, required dual authentication for digital records, conducted quarterly audits, and restricted even internal discussions about the cell line to need-to-know personnel. 2 years later, one of the scientists accepted a job at a competitor. During the exit interview, the company discovered that the scientist had been documenting the cell line's characteristics in personal notes, not to steal them, but to reference them in future work. Because the company had already implemented strong controls and exit protocols, they caught the issue before any transfer occurred. They reminded the scientist of his NDA obligations, collected the notes, and avoided what could have been catastrophic misappropriation. That's the power of a risk matrix. It forces you to act before the threat materializes. It moves protection from reactive to proactive. Like any model, the matrix depends on input quality. Assessments must be grounded in actual workflows, not abstract fears. They must reflect current behavior, not aspirational policy. But when done rigorously, the matrix provides a defensible, transparent basis for risk classification, one that holds up under internal review and external scrutiny. Risk matrices tell you what to prioritize, but they don't tell you how threats will actually materialize. For that, you need a structured way to map threat vectors, the specific pathways through which secrets can be lost. This is where the 5W1H framework becomes invaluable. It's a simple tool adapted from journalism and investigative analysis. It asks 6 questions about every potential threat: who, what, when, where, why, and how. Let's break it down. Who are the potential adversaries? This isn't about paranoia, it's about realistic threat modeling. Are you most worried about departing employees taking files to competitors? About vendors who have access but weak internal controls? About foreign actors seeking to steal technology? About careless contractors who might inadvertently disclose information? Different adversaries require different defenses. If your primary threat is employee mobility, you need strong exit protocols and post-employment monitoring. If it's vendor exposure, you need airtight non-disclosure agreements and audit rights. If it's nation-state espionage, you need cybersecurity measures that go far beyond industry norms. What information is at risk? Not all trade secrets face the same threats. Technical secrets embedded in source code face reverse engineering risks. Customer lists face risks when sales teams change jobs. Manufacturing processes face risks when you outsource production to third-party facilities. Mapping what is at risk helps you tailor protections. You don't protect source code the same way you protect customer data. Different information types require different safeguards. When is the information most vulnerable? Certain moments create heightened risk. When an employee gives notice and has 2 weeks left with full system access, when you're pitching to investors and must share confidential projections, when a partnership ends and the former partner still has files on their servers, when you're filing for regulatory approval and must disclose technical details publicly. Identifying when risks spike allows you to implement time-sensitive controls, like revoking access immediately upon an employee's resignation, or using virtual data rooms that expire after due diligence ends. Where does the information live? Is it on secure company servers or scattered across employees' personal devices? Is it in cloud storage with strong encryption or in shared folders accessible to third parties? Is it on paper in locked cabinets or sitting in unlocked file rooms? Physical and digital location shape vulnerability. A trade secret stored only on a single air-gapped server in a locked facility is far more secure than one circulating via email to dozens of contractors. Why would someone take the information? Understanding motivation helps you assess which threats are most credible. An employee leaving for a competitor has both motive and opportunity. A vendor working with multiple clients might inadvertently cross-contaminate information. A disgruntled employee facing termination might seek leverage or revenge. Motivation analysis isn't about judging character. It's about predicting behavior so you can design appropriate controls. How could the information be taken or disclosed? This is where technical analysis becomes critical. Could someone download files to a USB drive, email documents to a personal account, take screenshots of proprietary dashboards, photograph whiteboards during meetings, share access credentials with unauthorized parties? Each pathway requires a different countermeasure. If the risk is USB exfiltration, you disable USB ports on sensitive workstations. If it's email forwarding, you implement data loss prevention tools that flag outbound messages containing confidential terms. If it's credential sharing, you require multi-factor authentication and monitor for unusual login patterns. Let me show you how this works in practice. A manufacturing client had developed a proprietary coding process that gave their products a significant performance advantage. Using the 5W1H framework, we mapped the threats. Who? Former employees joining competitors, and vendors who applied the coding under contract. What? The specific chemical formula and application temperature sequence. When? During employee departures, and when vendors completed contracts but retained process documentation. Where? In digital files on the company's server, in paper notebooks kept by senior engineers, and in vendor facilities where the process was performed. Why? Competitors would pay handsomely for the formula. Vendors might see it as general know-how they could reuse. How? Employees could photograph notebooks or email formulas. Vendors could retain process documents after contracts ended. Based on this analysis, the company implemented targeted protections, stricter access controls for digital files, a policy requiring notebooks to be stored in locked cabinets, non-disclosure agreements with vendors that explicitly identified the formula as confidential and required its return upon contract termination, and exit interviews where departing engineers were reminded of confidentiality obligations and asked to surrender all physical and digital materials. 2 years later, when a former engineer started a competing business, the company was able to obtain an injunction based on evidence that the engineer had accessed the formula files in his final week and hadn't returned his process notebook. The 5W1H analysis created the roadmap for both protection and enforcement. Before we close, let me address a practical concern. Many companies already have risk management frameworks in place. ISO 31000, NIST, cybersecurity framework, industry-specific compliance regimes. You don't need to build trade secret risk assessment from scratch. You need to integrate it into existing systems. ISO 31000 provides a general model, establish context, identify risks, analyze likelihood and impact, implement treatments, and review outcomes. That model maps perfectly onto trade secret protection. The context is your competitive environment. The risks are the vectors we've discussed. The treatments are the safeguards you design. The review process includes audits and inventory updates. The NIST cybersecurity framework is even more specific for digital environments. It emphasizes 5 functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Applied to trade secrets. Identify what information qualifies as a secret. Protect it through access controls and encryption. Detect anomalies through logging and monitoring. Respond when breaches occur. Recover by containing damage and updating controls. Integration helps ensure consistency across legal, technical, and operational teams. When everyone works from the same framework, policies are more likely to be implemented, understood, and enforced. Trade secrets don't sit in a legal silo. They exist in code repositories, factory floors, and vendor databases. Protecting them requires shared language and shared responsibility. Let's recap. Vulnerability audits expose the gaps between policy and practice. They map who has access, how information is shared, and whether safeguards are actually enforced. They create the documentation courts expect to see when evaluating reasonable efforts. Risk matrices prioritize threats by combining likelihood and impact. They help organizations focus resources on the secrets that matter most and the risks that are most credible. They turn abstract concerns into actionable decisions. The The 5W1H framework structures threat analysis by asking who might take information, what is at risk, when vulnerabilities peak, where secrets live, why adversaries would act, and how they could succeed. It transforms vague anxieties into concrete, addressable pathways. And integration with enterprise risk frameworks ensures that trade secret protection isn't siloed. It's embedded in the systems companies already use to manage cybersecurity, compliance, and operational risk. In our next lecture, we'll turn to valuation, the process of quantifying what trade secrets are actually worth. Valuation matters for damages calculations, M&A transactions, licensing negotiations, and insurance. But it also matters for something more fundamental. Understanding why a secret is valuable helps you decide how much to invest in protecting it. We'll explore the three main methodologies: cost to develop, revenue advantage, and licensing comparables, and when to use each one. Thanks for listening. See you in the next lecture.